A person who thinks all the time has nothing to think about except thoughts. So he loses touch with reality and lives in a world of illusions. By thoughts, I mean specifically chatter in the skull, perpetual and compulsive repetition of words, of reckoning and calculating. I'm not saying that thinking is bad. Like everything else, it's useful in moderation. A good servant, but a bad master. And all so-called civilized peoples have increasingly become crazy and self-destructive because through excessive thinking they have lost touch with reality. That's to say, we confuse signs with the real world.
My life has been a long one so far. Pretty difficult too, and if I'm being honest, I've not entirely enjoyed it. Which, to be fair, I guess most people might say in today's world. I spent too much of my time thinking and not enough doing. For the last 4 years of my life, I've been homeless, and honestly, it's given me nothing but time to think. A lot of people go through life wondering if they're on the right path or if they should have chosen something different. Hell, even I suffer from that. I've remade this video 6 times in total now. The original video was around an hour long. So this is just a summarization of the things I'm thinking about so far and me vocalizing how I feel. If you're interested in knowing more about my life, let me know down below. To start off, I'll talk about how I grew up a bit. Growing up for me was like hell on earth. I was constantly beaten by an alcoholic father, and we were exceptionally poor. I spent too many years of my life eating nothing but peanut butter sandwiches when I was at home. When I wasn't being beaten, I had small reprieves of sleep and hunger, and I had to deal with a master manipulator of a sister. She'd lie and blame me for the stuff she did, and since I was already the primary target for my father, it just gave him an extra reason to beat me senseless. Even now, I find myself using trauma tactics to avoid simple conflict, like saying I don't know when confronted with people questioning me on basic things. I grew up in a primarily black and Hispanic community and leaned more towards honoring the lessons taught from them than I ever did the ones from my father attempted to beat into me. I spent a lot of my time in my preteen years and early teens in the public library or going to churches when I wasn't in school. I grew up in a small town in North Carolina in the United States, which in itself is a pretty good state. The name I use online, Atlas, actually comes from an English class in middle school. We were learning about Greek mythology, and a girl in class, can't remember who now, piped up and was like, "Oh, that sounds like him." A handful of people called me Atlas in real life, and so the name kind of just stuck. Roughly when I was 16 or 17, life took a turn for the worse, I guess, and I ended up in foster care. Oddly enough, was actually pretty beneficial for me and freeing. I learned a lot of lessons on dating, friends, and normal teenager stuff. Foster care is in of itself a long story that I'll tell one day. I feel like it gets a lot of rightful criticism looking at some of the homes I was in, but also a lot of undue hate. Once I was 18 and comfortably settled into foster care, it was time for me to mostly age out of active duty cases, as I was now technically an adult. Support for foster cases, in North Carolina at least, doesn't end until about 22 to 25, depending on how you utilize services, but you're basically aged out at 18. We had one final meeting around this time, and this is kind of where I messed up my life, if I'm being completely honest. My sister just so happened to pipe up, asking about her mother, and I sadly let it happen. A year later, and I had moved down to where my mother was in South Carolina to get away from my father's side of the family. I got my first official job and was paying bills being a responsible adult. I think roughly a year and a half into when I was living with my mother is around the point where my mom's boyfriend got sick of her bullshit and finally dumped her. My mother and my sister stopped coming home, and I was left paying the rent, electric, and internet on a house that I couldn't afford. I ended up in massive debt. Turns out you don't need to go to college to enter an unreasonably high amount of debt. I moved in with an ex-coworker of mine and was there for about a year until my grandfather came down to apologize for all the lies he believed from my sister. Once I had moved back to where that side of my family was, my father's side, otherwise North Carolina, I worked various jobs and got into various high-level positions despite moving around a lot. That leads us to about 2017, 2018, somewhere. So at this point, I think I was somewhere in my 20s. I've had some jobs and made some money. I still didn't buy a car yet, as I didn't need one growing up and mostly walked everywhere. I moved in with my uncle's best friend, who had been friends since childhood, and he apparently was going through a very bad breakup and drinking himself to death. Interestingly, I got him through that drinking phase by allowing himself to drink himself to sleep every night and then dumping a bunch more cans down the drain, which made him suspect that he was really seriously having issues. I lived with my uncle's friend for about 2 years and rose to a manager position at a local restaurant. I met a girl while living there and working at the restaurant, and this eventually led to me expressing to her that I wanted to do more with my life. She convinced me to apply for a job I was looking at, and I surprisingly got the job. I think I was there for about 6 or 8 months before the pandemic and about 3 months after the pandemic started. In late 2019, I was saying goodbye to my friends over the course of a week at the end of December, and the day before I was supposed to fly out, I came home and found that my roommate had gotten pissed I hadn't told him I was leaving, and he had changed the locks. Sucks to suck, I guess. Fast forward a couple months later, and the company eventually closed down due to the pandemic, and I was jobless. At this point, I was being cashed out my money and was in some dire straits. Around early summer 2020, I started working at another restaurant in the area, and that was my first experience being robbed. Not by the restaurant, but being homeless and on the streets. Somebody came by and just robbed me of my shit. Shortly at the end of the later end of summer, during America's quote unquote summer of love, I was mugged at gunpoint for a couple $100 I had on me. Later that winter, I was robbed again and had everything, including my tent, clothes, and bedding stolen, which was insanely depressing. Turns out, when you're on the street, everyone is a competitor and a threat, which is exhaustingly taxing on your mental and physical health. If I'm being honest, I think that's why so many people remain or start drug usage in America. Everything is to fund that escapism. Weird as this may sound to some, I had you guys. And that support kept me with my head down, just trudging on. Genesis has been a labor of love because of that, and has definitely helped me focus my life and refine myself in what exactly I wanted to do. I've lived on and off the street more or less for the last 4 years, and while there's much more story to tell, I won't go into that now. But it has given me a lot of time to reflect on what I want in life. So that leads us to today, or rather to the last 2 months, which have been a long, painful reminder of me being homeless and have kinda worn me out again. For the last 2 months, I've been in contact with family that lives in California. Sadly, that hasn't really given any sense of hope. I originally planned on moving out there despite the high costs, if I could get out there, but as you can see on screen, I was basically told to work harder. They did send me money and a good bit of it, which was obviously a huge boon. So I paid off my debts and paid my phone bill a year in advance and originally saved up much of that money. With some due pressure from my aunt, I ended up getting a hotel room for a week, which I honestly did need, but I regret now. Hindsight is 2020 and all that. Bear in mind, I don't fault my aunt or grandmother, but at the same time, that push to buy things like clothes and stuff I wouldn't have normally bought at that time has left me with less than what I started with, as I got robbed again. 4 years later, and the same issues are the same issues. What a wonderful life and all that. But that led me to my current wants and goals. Van life. The ability to take you guys along with me throughout my life and make interesting enough content to watch while I work on various projects and just explore what the hell is in America. I'm sadly not vain enough to just record my life, although I'm sure some of it would make great content to have a giggle about. I don't necessarily fulfill a lot of checkboxes to life or to living life in America, and if I'm being honest, I feel like that is kind of a turnoff for a lot of people. I do think sometimes people need boxes to check, to brush your teeth, wear clean, freshly pressed clothes, wash your butt, eat healthy foods, stay active. But that doesn't mean that everybody needs the same boxes, or even that some people need boxes at all. What about those who swim a different way, don't need the checkboxes, or don't want them? What about the people who dare to dream differently? What about those who blaspheme against the systems and the dogma of the system? One of my favorite channels had this to say for those kinds of people.
Think about this. In 1903, when the Wright brothers and others were building airplanes, the New York Times said manned flight would not be possible for 1 to 10 million years.
Oops.
And in 1985, the New York Times said no matter how inexpensive or powerful a laptop computer would become, nobody would want one.
No, boy.
And when Apple announced the iPhone, the Times said they'd probably never build it, and even if they did, nobody would buy it.
Ay.
And speaking of Twitter, here's what the New York Times said when it launched.
Using Twitter for literate communication is about as likely as firing up a CB radio and hearing some guy recite the Iliad. Whether the service could be made into a sustainable business, quite unknown. I'm skeptical. Blah, 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 blah.
Haven't I always told you, don't trust the media?
You have. If you suggest that levitating heavy objects with sound or creating free energy is even possible, you're viciously attacked. Not just by Facebook and Twitter, but by the New York freaking Times. Aren't new ideas worth exploring? Did Steve Jobs care what people thought about him? Does Elon Musk care? No. They just went out and changed the world. So my message today is not to the corporate media or social media. They make money by getting all of us to attack each other. That's their business model. It's shameful, and that's why nobody trusts them. Who cares? George Bernard Shaw said, all great truths begin as blasphemies. This message is to those blasphemers, to the recluse out there building castles with sound and magnets and his own hands, to the nerd in the garage tinkering with electronics because he knows in his heart there is a better way. This message is to the next Kepler, Jobs, Elon Musk, to the misfits and dreamers and visionaries. My message is to you. They are going to attack you. They are going to hate you. Ignore them. Keep dreaming. Keep building. Keep blaspheming. Because I can tell you with 100% certainty, the world needs you much more than it needs the New York Times.
In fact, for a long time, I felt like a failure because I just didn't get along with the system. And I don't think that's a failure of myself anymore. There's other ways to live your life. There's other ways to dream of being successful, and the meanings of success are different for everybody. So this video is for those people as much as it is for me. It's okay to feel lost. It is okay to feel overwhelmed. Focus on things day by day and work on the things you do want. My current goal is to get this channel monetized and to get a van to live out of. I'm 30 years old, and if my life wasn't as messy, I'm sure I'd be another person checking boxes. My life is and was messy, though, and that led me to here. I'm proud to be who I am, even if I'm not proud of where I am at in life. I do need all the help I can get, and I'm not ashamed to admit that anymore. The average human life is about 80 across the planet. That's a long time. I'm not even halfway through life, and I'm sure many of you aren't either. So, for all of those out there, continue to dream. Alexander Fleming, the man who invented penicillin, was near 40 when he found his achievement to mankind. And hey, it doesn't have to be a big achievement. Sometimes small ones mean more. Getting out of bed and fighting through your depression every day can be just as big of an achievement. To put it bluntly, we are not the sum of our history and the parts that make it. Rather, we are the addition of our future to all of mankind. The infinity of possibility is our greatest contribution we bring every day that we're alive. If you're just joining us at this point in the video because you skipped here, hi, welcome. Starting with channel news, I'm adding more types of content to the channel. I think I got stuck in the idea of a brand rather than a person, and that's held me back a bit. My content got stale and boring in my own head, and there's lots I want to talk about and explore in general. So if you're here for it, I'm going to take you all along throughout my life and explore topics that interest me beyond games and modding. In the future, I plan on making daily videos about my life, but we'll get to that point when we, finally get there. Once every 2 weeks, or maybe sooner, I'll release a longer video that covers things that interest me. Just general commentary. The plan being every Monday we'll have 1 or 2 new Mod Monday videos, and every Friday or every other Friday longer commentary videos. I want to stream when I get back in a stable environment, and I'll make shorts along the way to cover smaller topics and such. As for Genesis, I don't have an exact timeline, but I'm aiming for 9.0 Part 2 to come late January. The next update is about ready for release, and it just needs some more polish. I've got to work on the wiki a bunch to get prepared for that. Once this next update is out, that leaves the bi-weekly updates and polish, which means dialogue and AI is just around the corner, which will honestly be a lot more fun to work on. Valhalla Gothic MMO will have its first release before Christmas in time for the holidays and, everyone being home. When exactly, I don't know yet. But I'll have more videos on that too in the coming months. And of course, thank you all for being a part of the community. I genuinely value those who have stuck around. Seriously, it means a lot. Those who have been here since the pre-alpha and alpha phases of Genesis, those who joined for the beta, those who have cheered me on while I streamed, and those who have quite literally offered me a place to stay. You know who you are. Thank you immensely to those who support me financially, and those who, support me non-financially. It's not much, and I don't expect much from you guys, but it genuinely means a lot to know that I provide any kind of value to you guys enough for you guys to support me. If you guys do want to support the journey and help me out, you can find links below, like Ko-Fi and such, which has a visible gold marker on it. You can also support me on Discord, which gives access to the betas and previews to my content. Leave a like or a dislike, and if you guys want to know more about my life, let me know down below. If this video interested you at all, subscribe. I may do more like this in the future. Thank you everyone for watching. I'm Atlas, and I will see you guys real soon.